PhilipIngram is a retired British Army colonel. Welcome to our program, Colonel Ingram.
Thank you for having me back again.
US President Donald Trump threatens Vladimir Putin. He says that Putin is destroying Russia by not making a deal, and things will only get worse for the Russian dictator if he doesn't settle the war. Do you see these new threats from Trump to Russia, to Kremlin, as another humiliation for Vladimir Putin?
Oh, of course, it's another humiliation for Vladimir Putin, but it's a threat that Donald Trump is using against a lot of different people. You know, it's economics seems to be driving the bullying tactics that Trump is using. And it's clear that any discussion before his inauguration that Trump and his team has had with Putin didn't go the way either Putin wanted it to go or the way Trump wanted it to go. So he's threatening him again.
So you're confident that even before the inauguration, there were some kind of discussions between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin?
Well, Donald Trump's team said that Donald Trump had spoken to Vladimir Putin. Immediately after that happened, Putin's mouthpiece stood up and said that there hadn't been a conversation between them. And then the very day after, Russian national television broadcast naked pictures of Melania Trump all over primetime television. Now that, to me, says that there probably was a conversation between Putin and Trump or their teams. It hadn't gone the way that Putin wanted it to go, and therefore, in good old former spies tactics, he threatened Donald Trump by exposing naked pictures of Donald Trump's wife. And that is, as you will know well, a typical Russian intelligence agency's method of trying to threaten someone. Trump has clearly come back now that he's been gone through his inauguration and is the 47th president of the United States, and come back with real economic threats. We have to see how Putin is going to deal with those.
So it seems like Vladimir Putin's threats did not work with Trump. You just mentioned about the naked picture of the First Lady and Russian propagandist on the state TV. From your perspective, these threats didn't work with Trump, because today Donald Trump threatens Vladimir Putin.
Oh, very much so. I think Donald Trump has come into his new presidency with a newfound confidence, which is why we're seeing not just his economic threats against Russia. He knows Russia is in a very, very poor economic position and will probably collapse completely during 2025. But we're seeing Trump using similar tactics against Canada, against Mexico, against China, against Panama. And he has threatened to do the same against the EU.
You just mentioned about the possibility of Russia's collapse this year. And how can you assess the possibility of Russia's collapse, not only from an economic point of view, but also from a point of view of Vladimir Putin's regime and his weakness inside Russia, as Reuters reported that Russian allies would like to see the peaceful settlement of the war, because Russia's economy is in a free fall right now, and also the representatives of the big business would like to see a ceasefire deal.
Yeah, Putin is a survivor, so whether Putin and his regime collapses along with the Russian economy, I'm not as certain. I think the Russian economy and Russia's ability to continue to prosecute its war against Ukraine at the levels it has been doing will collapse during 2025 for two reasons. One, the Russian economy is being undermined. The successful attacks that Ukraine is carrying out against Russia's oil processing infrastructure, against other Russian manufacturing capabilities, against Russian airfields, the increase in capability of long-range drones in Ukraine, and the development of domestic ballistic missile capability, long-range ballistic missile capability, is something that I think Ukraine will exploit more and more through 2025. That is having a massive economic impact on Russia. Alongside that economic impact, the shortage of personnel, either to go into the factories and try and increase manufacturing output, or to join the military and to fight in the front line, is causing Putin very, very real political headaches. And again, Russia has relied on a lot of the equipment that it is put to the front line as equipment that they've taken out of long-term storage, they've refurbished it, and they then push it out as operational equipment to the front line. Those long-range storage sites are just about depleted completely, and Russia cannot replace the equipment that it's losing through manufacturing fast enough, and therefore we will see an overall decline. That is why Trump sees threats, economic threats against Putin, as probably the best way of forcing Putin to the negotiating table. I think Ukraine is, if it can hold out from a manpower perspective on the front line, is in a much better position to influence when any discussions would take place by what it's continuing to do with attacks at, in military planning terms, you call it the operational level, interdicting Russia's ability to maintain support for its tactical operations.
Let's cover also another humiliating defeat for Vladimir Putin and also Kim Jong-un. North Korean troops have been pulled off the front lines because of heavy casualties on the ground, according to the New York Times. What is your take on this retreat of North Korean units?
Yeah, I'm not surprised that the North Korean troops being pulled back to regroup, to go through potentially further training, trying to integrate any military force that is not from within your own organization into an operational situation without there being a lot of training beforehand and understanding each other's tactics and some form of common language and common doctrine, common tactics, which there isn't between Russia and North Korea, is virtually impossible. And for Russia to try and do that, it shows how desperate they are. North Korea, their troops are very good at the very low level tactical tactics. They know how to fire their weapons accurately. They are quite fit. They know enough about traditional military tactics, from trench warfare to traditional attacks. What they don't know, and they can't put this into perspective, is in an environment where the threat is much more sophisticated, with the FPV drone threat that Ukraine is applying successfully across the battlefield, with the artillery threat that there is. And then as soon as North Korea's troops on the ground start to get broken up, they don't have the non-commissioned officer structure and the officer structure with the ability to react, and therefore they are effectively just feeding the meat grinder that we keep hearing about, and their casualties have been excessive compared to the numbers of troops that they've put in. So time for them to go back, regroup, rethink their tactics, but I don't think they're going to change. I don't think it's in their psyche to be able to change.
Also, Vladimir Putin faces another humiliation in Syria. Recently, there were talks, according to Reuters, between Russian delegation and the new Syrian government delegation. Russia tried to negotiate to keep its military bases in Syria. However, Russian side has failed to do so because the new Syrian government asked Russia to rebuild trust with Syria throughout compensation, reconstruction, and recovery, and also they asked to give up, to abandon Bashar al-Assad, to bring him back home to Syria. What is your take on such a failure of Russian side to negotiate its military presence in Syria?
This is a major, major humiliation for Vladimir Putin. Effectively, unless he can find somewhere else to base his capability in the Mediterranean, and Libya is a possibility, then he will lose any influence he has across the Mediterranean. And of course, the Mediterranean, his Syrian bases were important as a stopping off point for his military activities into Africa. So this is having a massive geopolitical impact for Vladimir Putin, as well as it being extremely humiliating. You know, he's lost the base for his Mediterranean fleet. He's lost some key hub airports for supporting other operations around the world. He's lost a big training facility that he had with Bashar al-Assad. He hasn't been able to use it for a few years because of the war that was ongoing inside Syria. But he's also lost intelligence collection bases, and it's an area of interest to him. And with all of that, having lost all of that, he will have lost some influence, and his relationship with Iran in particular, but also the way that will play out by perception into China and elsewhere will not play well for Vladimir Putin. So it is a huge humiliation for him.
So even if he negotiates, reaches agreement with Libya to have military presence there in Libya, from your perspective, it could take years to build new military installations for naval activities there and for Air Force.
Oh, very much so. It takes you 5+ years to build a naval port and to build military airports. And of course, Libya, there's still a lot of Western influence in Libya, so there'll be pressure being put on by the West not to let Russia start to do this. And I don't know of any other countries that may want to partner up with Russia, especially as Russia is beginning to seem very, very weak in what it's doing inside Ukraine. Russia's economy is in a very difficult position, and therefore any promises it might give to pay for facilities, those promises may not be fulfilled in any way, shape or form. And therefore I think Russia is in an increasingly desperate position. This is almost a bigger humiliation for Vladimir Putin than the successful attacks that Ukraine is raining down on Russian oil infrastructure on a daily basis.
Let's also get back to negotiations between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin. So US President Donald Trump said that he and Vladimir Putin could soon take significant action toward ending the war in Ukraine. How could this look like, and how could this all can play out?
Well, I think this is Donald Trump telling Vladimir Putin that he's going to take significant action, and Putin is going to agree with him. I don't think Vladimir Putin is necessarily going to agree with him. Donald Trump is approaching things like the businessman that he is. He's not a professional politician. He has been a professional businessman where the tactics that he's used are bullying tactics. He will try and bid another business rival in a way that he forces them into a position where they haven't got anywhere to maneuver. But then the Russians have got a similar way when it comes to playing poker. Russian oligarchs will sit with the worst hand that you can possibly get in poker and try and bid their way out of having to show their hand and to lose the game and force other people to give up. Trump is doing the same. So effectively, he's calling Russia's bluff and trying to dictate what they're going to do. This is going to be a very interesting game. I think what it'll do is increase the tensions that there are between Putin and between Trump, because Trump will not want to give up and won't give up. Putin won't want to give up unless he can sell some form of success to the Russian people for his special military operation, his war against Ukraine. And he will he won't want to give up any territory. In fact, he'll probably want to secure more territory as part of any negotiation. Trump won't want that. Trump sees give and take on both sides. And this is where I think President Zelensky is playing a very, very clever game, because he's making all the right noises to say he's willing to negotiate and give some concessions and talk for other solutions and everything else. At the same time, Vladimir Putin is entrenching himself. This year, we're going to see a big falling out, I think, between Trump and Putin, unless Trump can force Putin's hand somewhere or other.
Do you believe that Trump can force Putin to accept a ceasefire deal on appropriate for Ukraine terms if he uses all the leverage over Russia and Vladimir Putin? It seems like Donald Trump has more leverage over Vladimir Putin rather than Putin has over Donald Trump.
Oh, Trump has an awful lot more leverage. It all depends on how much pain Putin wants to accept before he will roll over. And I think you know Russian psychology probably better than I do. Putin is willing to accept an awful lot of pain. And I don't think Trump is going to want to ramp up his threats and his economic attacks and what he does elsewhere very, very fast. He'll want to gradually increase it. I think Putin has got an awful lot of survivability still left in him. So we are in an interesting time, especially as Trump is picking fights with lots of other countries around the world as well from an economic perspective. It's whether he's got the political capital, the time, the energy, the focus to look at all of these different economic fronts at once, because he'll be seeing Russia merely as an economic front, as something that he wants to try and deal with as quickly as possible.
There is a big debate in Europe about the possibility of sending peacekeeping forces to Ukraine as a part of a big ceasefire deal between the United States, Russia and Ukraine. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is confident that at least 200,000 European soldiers would be needed to properly enforce a ceasefire line between Ukrainian and Russian forces. Also, Times reported that at least 600,000 troops would be needed to properly enforce a ceasefire demilitarized zone. What is your opinion about this?
Well, the trouble is, whenever military sense says 200,000 or 600,000, the European Union will probably come up with 60 or 100 as what they'd offer. There are so many things to go through. There's an awful lot of speculation going on at the moment, and I think what we're seeing amongst European countries, by way of a sop to Donald Trump, is open discussions about the possibility to try and identify who would be a coalition of the willing to send troops into Ukraine. But there has to be a ceasefire, first of all. The conditions to that ceasefire have to meet what the Ukrainian people and President Zelensky wants, because he is the one that has got the decision on behalf of the Ukrainian people. It has to be something that Vladimir Putin would sign up to and could see something coming out of there. Maybe he would use it as a pause to try and strengthen his armed forces on the ground, which is why there'd need to be a strong NATO or European presence. But I don't think Vladimir Putin would accept there being a NATO or a coalition of the willing if it was made up of primarily NATO countries' presence on the ground inside Ukraine. So that in itself could be a barrier to any form of peace agreement. So I think what we're seeing is political discussion, testing what we say in the UK is testing the waters, dipping your big toe into the water to see if it's too hot, to try and see where the discussion will go in a public domain that will then help inform the politicians to decide what they can do privately, and also to try and suggest to Donald Trump that Europe is willing to become more proactive in any solution that there will be with Ukraine. But we're a long way off that at the moment, I think.
Let's also cover China. China is building a new military command center near Beijing that is 10 times the size of Pentagon, according to the US intelligence official. Do you see this as another indication that China is getting ready for a war against Taiwan and against, for example, the United States?
Really quite simple. I'm giving a presentation to the British military tomorrow, and one of my slides in it says China is preparing for war. Full stop. It doesn't mean that there's going to be a war, but it's preparing, and it's preparing hard. It's preparing its military. It is building its forces up enormously, fielding new pieces of equipment, fielding new missiles, new weapon systems, building its navy up, building its air force up. It is increasing its training, and its training is focused primarily on the military capture of Taiwan. If anything starts as a first military operation, that is probably what it would do as a first military operation. And it's building all of these bases. But whenever you're looking at the overt military stuff, it's really important that you look at what's going on from a logistics, from the boring side of things. I knew that Russia was going to invade Ukraine almost 3 years ago, whenever the reports came out of the Russians sending blood to frontline medical facilities. You don't send blood if you're going to continue your military exercising. And Russia had threatened Ukraine several times beforehand, but not outloaded the war stocks, the ammunition, the blood, the medical supplies to forward positions. As soon as you got that in, it's not something you take out of the fridges, you deploy forward, and then you can bring it back again at any stage. No, it's a statement of intent. If you look at what's happening in China, China is stockpiling food, it's stockpiling oil and gas reserves, it's stockpiling precious minerals, it's stockpiling iron and steel. It is preparing stockpiles so that it can survive if it's in a conflict situation and can't get the imports that it needs to survive. That is China preparing for war, full stop, no ifs or buts.
And what side has a better chance to win in this conflict? I mean, China and the United States and Taiwan.
Well, if China goes to war over Taiwan, the United States will get involved because the United States' focus is primarily into the Pacific region. This would destabilize the Pacific region, but it would cause global destabilization. You know, we saw the economic shock that went through the world almost 3 years ago when Russia reinvaded Ukraine. And the effect that that had on energy prices and the global markets. That is nothing compared to what would happen if China decided to try and forcibly take Taiwan and it started a regional conflict. And there's then a very grave danger with this axis of evil that we've got between China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea. That axis of evil with its tentacles into the conflict between Ukraine and Russia in Europe, between Iran and its proxies in different parts of the Middle East, and then Southeast Asia coming in. There's a very real possibility of those joining together and us getting into a situation where there's a global conflict, and therefore every country in the world getting involved in this conflict on one side or the other. So I think it's very dangerous to talk about who would win and who would lose, because I think humanity would lose given the size of the forces that there are on the Chinese side and the US side. I don't think, even if there was a conventional conflict, that it would rapidly move into nuclear stakes. But you never know when you've got the likes of Kim Jong-un in North Korea and what he could potentially do. So we're living in an increasingly dangerous time.
But it also seems that the Chinese side is getting ready for a nuclear war, because a former US intelligence official said that the new base could act as a secure bunker for Chinese officials to protect them against a nuclear attack. And from your perspective, why are they so afraid of such a possibility of nuclear confrontation? And it seems like they're also moving around its nuclear weapons, also increasing number of nuclear warheads right now.
Yeah, I was going to say China's increasing its number of nuclear warheads. It's increasing its activity in space, which will be valuable or invaluable for its longer-range nuclear weapons. You know, as China prepares for war, it recognizes that its potential adversaries, the United States, the United Kingdom, France, are all nuclear powers, and therefore it'll want to deter any move to use nuclear weapons to try and stop the huge numbers of pieces of equipment, huge numbers of personnel that China could bring into any conflict, and therefore to reduce the threat of nuclear activity. To do that, it will want to match the arsenals of the West, at least on a one-to-one basis, and therefore maintain that mutually assured destruction threat that has stopped nuclear war since 1945. It's a very dangerous game for China to play.
Also, yes, President Donald Trump also says that he will retake control over the Panama Canal. And because China is running this canal, according to Donald Trump, is he right? Do you feel that China is running this canal right now?
Yeah, there are two key ports on the Panama Canal at the Pacific end and at the Atlantic end. Both of those ports are being run by Hong Kong registered companies. So the Chinese Communist Party has got direct links into them. There's an increasing number of businesses opening up in Panama. And through Central America and into South America, China is increasing its Belt and Road Initiative. In the way it's taken over large portions of Africa, it's now trying to do the same economically into South America and into Central America. I understand only yesterday that Marcus Rubio, the new United States Secretary of State, has visited Panama, and Panama has reversed the ownership of the ports and accepted that it will remove Chinese influence from the Panama Canal, which is step one in meeting Donald Trump's demands. That will only embolden Donald Trump, where he sees that when he puts huge threats against different countries, then they roll over and give in to him. So that will embolden him to use threats against more countries if it turns out that Marcus Rubio has managed to negotiate the removal of Chinese influence from the Panama Canals.
Also, let's cover Greenland. Donald Trump recently said that Greenland would be taking control over this island, would be in the US national security interest. NATO also is proposing the US just to increase its military presence in Greenland. What is your take on that, and how significant is this island for the US national interests?
Well, I think it's easy to take Greenland in isolation. It's easy to take Greenland in isolation, the threats on Panama in isolation, the threats to Canada in isolation. There are a number of things that are coming together, and the catalyst that has brought them together was Donald Trump's statement that he's going to produce 40 nuclear-powered icebreakers. And what is coming together is all about trade, and it's opening up the trade routes that use the Arctic seas, going round the north of Canada and down into the Atlantic, which is another route, meaning that there's less reliance on the Panama Canal to get between the two oceans, and it's a shorter route and it's more economically viable. So if we look at that from a threat perspective, there's the ice and the icebreakers. Russia's got nuclear-powered icebreakers. Canada is the largest country covering a lot of that area. It only spends 1.27% of its GDP on defense. Donald Trump doesn't like that, especially as it's a NATO member and a Five Eyes member. So he's pressurizing Canada as much as he possibly can. What he wants Canada to do, and this will be said behind closed doors, not publicly, is to increase its defense spending enormously. The same with Greenland, and Greenland is another one of the flanks covering that trade route should the North Sea, Arctic Ocean routes open up for trade. And again, Panama is all about trade, US shipping. It's the biggest source of shipping going through the Panama Canal. It's trying to get better tariffs for US ships going through the Panama Canal and stop the threat of Chinese influence on that should there be a need for US to guarantee supply chains going through there. Take it all as a big circle around the United States itself, and it's all trade routes that are going around. So Trump is, because he knows it will create headlines on Twitter, on X, and in press outlets, threatening Canada, Greenland, Panama. But in reality, it's all about trade and trade routes, and you have to see it holistically and all coming together from that perspective.
And my last question for you, do you feel that the United States, with Donald Trump in the White House, is becoming more powerful around the globe rather than during President Biden's presidency?
Yes, I think it is definitely more powerful around the globe, primarily because Donald Trump is completely unpredictable. And the last thing the wider geopolitical community like when it comes to dealing with countries, especially such powerful countries as the United States, is unpredictability. Joe Biden was predictable. He did nothing. He forgot things. He would always find the solution that didn't upset anyone in dealing with things. Trump is a disruptor. He was a disruptor in business. He was a disruptor when he was first president, when he was 5 years ago. He's now much more confident and therefore is approaching everything, having had that understanding, having had his apprenticeship as the 45th president of the United States, another 5 years to sit and think about what he wanted to do and watch what was going right and what was going wrong elsewhere, and is coming in with a much more confident plan. That means that he is in a much stronger position. And, I think the world is concerned about where he's going to go. Trump knows where he's going to go, and that's something that is difficult for diplomats to put into perspective, because it's outside their normal range of planning, of understanding.
And obviously, this unpredictability, this Trump's stance and his powerful stance without any obligations, and his unpredictability really are bad news for Russian dictator Vladimir Putin, who would like everything to be predicted properly by his KGB officers.
Oh, very much so. Putin doesn't like unpredictability. And what he doesn't like is the ability to influence and dictate himself. So, it's clear beforehand he's had something that had this special relationship between Trump and Putin. He had a threat over him, potentially, and we don't know exactly what that is. That seems to have dissipated or disappeared, or Trump has got to the point where he doesn't care. He's just going to out-bully Putin, who's a bully. When you get two bullies together and it turns into a fight, that will be a fight until one of the bullies is forced to go away and give up. And I think Donald Trump is in a stronger position here. So this is not good news for Vladimir Putin.
Thank you, Colonel Ingram, for your time and for your support for Ukraine, and glory to Ukraine.
Thank you very much indeed. Slava Ukraini.
Героям слава. Thank you very much.
Thank you.